Finding or making shelter in the 18th century was a common issue for those who found themselves away from their homes. People used a variety of different materials and techniques to put something between them and inclement weather. Today on the Deerskin Diary, we're going to look at some of those techniques and some of those materials, as well as explore a little bit about 18th century attitudes towards weather. So get under the awning with me on this one, folks. You're not going to want to miss it. So I remember being in Ireland one time and seeing this massive storm coming in on the radar and being concerned about it, right? I live in a very voracious media market where the weather is almost sold to me to try to gain my viewership for that particular channel. And I remember asking the nice older lady at the front desk how she thought that storm was going to pan out. And her answer has always stuck with me. She looked at me and said, "We get whatever the North Atlantic brings us." Now, I researched this topic from the perspective of a non-military 18th century traveler or long hunter, and kind of what they may have used. And the more I read and researched, the more I realized that Irish bed and breakfast owner's response seemed to be in keeping with what our 18th century ancestors probably thought about inclement weather. Now, in reading some of the accounts from the 18th century and doing the research for this video, I found that their relationship with nature and weather were very different from what ours are today. They were far less removed from their experiences with weather, and as a result, they seemingly had different tolerances for discomfort than what we have today. We have Gore-Tex rainwear and even heated socks to keep us separated from our environment and to maintain a consistency of comfort. But back then, those things obviously didn't exist, and they dealt with what life gave them. Nicholas Creswell was an English traveler in America from 1774 to 1777. He was a profound documenter of the weather and how he reacted to it. May the 2nd, 1774. Pleasant weather with light showers of rain. Friday, August 26, 1774. Fresh breezes with showers of rain and hazy weather. Friday, June 16, 1775. Very heavy rain last night, which made our lodging uncomfortable. Got underway this morning early with wet clothes and hungry bellies. And in the scene that I'm not willing to replicate, Tuesday, June 27, 1775. Very stiff current all day, heavy showers and very sultry. It is a custom with our company as soon as it begins to rain to strip naked and secure their clothes from the wet. I have attempted it twice today, but the drops of rain are so disagreeable to my skin that it obliged me to put on my shirt. Sometimes no shelter was the only option. This could be from a lack of time and due to an untimely storm or a lack of materials. Again, we turn to Creswell. Wednesday, June 14th, 1775. Very heavy rain last night, which we had no shelter but from a large tree. It made us wet lodging. Wednesday, June 28th, 1775. Heavy rain all afternoon, camped 5 miles above Sandy Creek. Obliged to sleep upon a log, the ground is so wet and still continues to rain. Natural shelters often availed themselves to travelers along the frontier. Anything from hollow trees to rock outcroppings, with the vast limestone formations in western Virginia, northern Tennessee, and eastern Kentucky, providing many opportunities for quick shelters from the elements. Daniel Trabue described one hasty shelter as, quote, "We went through the gap and down a few steps, and we was on a bench 10 or 12 feet wide, and there was a shelving rock from the ridge which mostly covered this bench. This shelving rock which covered our bench was like a half-face camp, and in the front about 8 feet high, and on the back side about 2 feet high. In the front of this bench, as we would look down, this mountain from where we stood appeared to be impassable to go down, as it was about 25 feet down to the next bench perpendicular." Many, if not most, shelters were a cobbled together mixture of natural and man-made materials. There are references to civilian tents, or civilians carrying tents at least, but we don't exactly know what those would have looked like. In looking at the totality of the references, though, it appears that they're likely some sort of large piece of cloth, perhaps with not any ends or doors, and something that could be set up in a variety of different ways. I have one example here with me. This is a hand-sewn tarp, and I'll be making a hand-sewn tarp in my next video, utilizing some of the vast amounts of research that folks have done on the military tents from the American Revolution. Monday, May the 8th, 1775. Heavy rain this morning, which obliged us to make a sort of awning from our tent cloths and blankets. Naturalist William Bartram spent a great deal of time in North America between 1773 and 1777. And during that time, he spent a lot of it outdoors, and he wrote extensively about the weather that he encountered and some of the different ways that he dealt with it. We pitched our tent under the shelter of a forest of live oaks, palms, and sweet bays. It beginning to thunder, I was sufficiently warned to prepare against a wet night, and observing a very large oak tree which had been thrown down by a hurricane and offered me a convenient shelter, as its enormous limbs bore up the trunk a sufficient height from the earth to admit me to sit or lie down under it, I spread my sail, slanting from the trunk of the tree to the ground, on the windward side, and having collected a quantity of wood sufficient to keep up a fire during the night, I struck one up in front, and spreading skins on the ground, and upon these placed a blanket. One half I laid down upon, turning the other over me for a covering. Now there was one seemingly common and at least disposable by their standards piece of shelter making material, and that is the use of animal hides. Now these animal hides themselves were the ones that weren't bound for market, and they were used for roofing material. And when they were done with them, they were seemingly just discarded or left there. If you know the price of one of these brain tan bison robes today, that is unthinkable by our standards. Mr. Smith and myself and some others went home with all the horses packed with meat, while the other men was to stay there and save the balance by salting and drying some of it. They had a camp covered with buffalo hides. Now, according to the historian and author Ted Franklin Ballou, in the late 1760s, Caspar Mansker killed several bison to make a bison boat and a shelter. Now, Ballou goes on to describe one long hunter who used bison hides stretched over poles to protect him from the, quote, damps and rains. I'd say this will do. There's another shelter type that we don't think about a lot today, and that's abandoned homes. The population along the American frontier was growing. In the American colonies themselves, in 1700, the population was only about 260,000. By the 1770s, it had grown over 2 million. Along the Wilderness Road, for example, there were homes, forts, and stations built every 8 to 12 miles in some areas, that distance mirroring the distance that a family could likely travel in a day. And those homes, occupied or unoccupied, all offered shelter to rain-soaked and weary travelers. Saturday, May 6, 1775. Found ourselves opposite Muddy Creek. The heavy rain obliged us to take shelter in a lone house and stay all night. At last, having repacked and sat off again without any material occurrence intervening, in the evening we arrived at the banks of the great Tallapoosa River and came to camp under shelter of some Indian cabins in expansive fields close to the riverbank, opposite the town of Savannah. So what are some options if you're headed out on a trek or a scout or a backcountry camping trip with your 18th century equipment? Well, in the summer months, if the place that you're visiting allows for it, I would recommend something as simple as a brush arbor or something as simple as a tarp shelter with a canvas tarp. In the warmer months, that's plenty because quite honestly, in the American South, you are going to be wet no matter what, either from your own perspiration or from the ambient weather conditions. Now for winter months, I recommend you augment with something like a tarp shelter. I have a hand-sewn linen tarp shelter that I use. I even have one that I made from a drop cloth from Home Depot that I use from time to time. And I'll try to augment animal hides and blankets and things around that to create a warmer style shelter. I have a saying that I like to use when it comes to my safety and survival coupled with historical authenticity. And that saying is, know the rules, know when to break them, and never break them out of laziness or ignorance. So the experience that I'm going for is as accurate as I can. That linen tarp shelter is not treated with anything, and when it gets pretty rainy, it is going to leak a little bit. So I have to always balance my needs. People in the 18th century who were caught out in the wilderness without proper clothing or equipment had to resort to extreme measures in order to survive. For example, walking around all night, walking in circles. There's a story of Davy Crockett in the 19th century where he would climb a tree and slide down the tree and climb the tree and slide down the tree. The friction from sliding down the tree and the amount of energy expended trying to climb the tree being what kept him warm. Now those are things that I am not willing to demonstrate here on the Deerskin Diary. Having to design and prepare a period-correct shelter using correct materials and research is another way for me to connect with my environment and the solution to a very historical dilemma. It is also another portal back in time that to me can only be replicated by doing and experiencing. And I can't wait to take the next time traveling journey with you. And until then, we'll see you next time on the Deerskin Diary.